Greetings and salutations, Friday the 13th fans. This is Mr. Venom welcoming you to the Crystal Lake gift shop. Our doors are now open. Please be careful with the goods on the shelves. Before we get into it, let me go ahead and introduce my coworker. He's going to be manning the cash register. He is our friend, Mr. Mike Maryman. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, what's up? I figure if I'm covering many of these anthology shows from this time period, what's one more, right?
There you go. There you go. I love it. And for episode 1, we were able to finagle a guest to come on. Go figure. This is a man that Mike and I have both worked with on the Theme Warriors podcast, along with various guest spots, such as the summer series on the podcast Under the Stairs and things like that. This is our friend, Mr. Doug Tilley. Doug, how the hell are you?
I'm doing so well. And really, thank you so much for having me on the very first episode. I mean, this could be the last episode. It all depends on how this whole thing goes.
We will see. We'll see how frustrated me and Mike get at each other. All right, folks. So as Mike already alluded to, this is our episode-by-episode retrospective of the Friday the 13th series, which aired from 1987 to 1990. We get three seasons with 24 episodes each, totaling 72 episodes. And Mike and I are going to do our damnedest to get through all 72. Mike is a veteran of, Burning for Springwood, which is also a kind of an episode-by-episode retrospective of the Freddy's Nightmare series. So Mike's got some good experience with some of these cheesy anthology shows of the 80s. I know they reviewed stuff like Monsters and Tales from the Crypt, so I'm excited.
Pain tolerance. The pain tolerance.
Yeah, I mean, you should basically feel no pain at this point.
It's a harsh lesson in how nostalgia often does you wrong.
And I might be learning that lesson in the coming weeks, so let's find out. For those who don't know, part of the reason that I wanted to start this was I watched these episodes religiously when I was younger. When they aired, back in 87, I watched every single episode. Religious viewer. Never bothered me that the series had nothing to do with the movie series, which I also already loved at that point. And I have not watched an episode since. So we're literally talking, about 32 years plus since I've watched an episode of this series. So I kind of wanted to revisit the series, see if I still have that nostalgic love for it that I think I have. But as Mike says, nostalgia does fail us sometimes. So begins our journey. But before we start talking about episode 1, I wanted to introduce Doug and ask him a little bit about his history with this series. How did you hear about it? Were you a viewer when it first aired? Stuff like that. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a little younger than you, so I did not. I mean, I did definitely watch it when it was originally on, just kind of because it was just something on. For those who are not as old as we are, we used to just watch things that were on television because there was nothing else on at the time. So this is just one of those shows that I remember being on a lot. The thing is, it was syndicated well into the 90s. So there was always opportunities to watch an episode here and there. I remember when it first started, though, because of the same confusion that has plagued this show for the past 32 years, which is its title. I mean, you actually have to really understand that at the time that this show debuted, it must have been right around the time of Freddy's Nightmares, right? I mean, it was in the same couple of years. Maybe Freddy's Nightmares came later. Is that right, Mike?
Didn't Freddy's Nightmares start like a year after this?
The thing is, I know there is definitely overlap because, after you kind of went into your history, I was going to kind of give my spiel about how I watched it in the same block of programming, basically. I guess I just lucked out that my local network, it was either Fox or whatever, like WB was back then. It was either Friday nights or Saturday nights where they threw a block of Freddy's Nightmares, Friday 13th, Tales from the Dark Side, and Monsters. So it was kind of like, every Friday or Saturday, I knew, okay, here's my 2-hour block. And I look back on it now, and it's kind of amazing that, wow, this was like on an actual broadcast network. Like, I would imagine them trying to sell that now, and they'd be like, well, no, like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Well, you know what they would say if they tried to sell it now, Mike, is, okay, yeah, we'll do a Friday the 13th series. It better fucking have Jason Voorhees in it. What are you doing? What are you doing creating a series called that without having, the one character that people associate with that title? Again, I don't want to be like angry about it, because I was angry about it in 1987, or maybe I wasn't. I was too young probably at that time. I certainly was angry in 1991 or 1992 when I was getting into horror movies. And the idea, I just remembered in my brain, I was like, there was a Friday the 13th TV series. Absolutely there was. Well, I mean, I remember it just being about some ridiculous antique shop, but I'm sure that they must incorporate Jason in there at some point, because otherwise, why call it Friday the 13th? Only to discover what everyone discovered, which is that it has no real connection to the Friday the 13th movie mythos whatsoever, outside of the fact that it shares a producer who was really trying to sell his ridiculous show about an antique shop. Mike, you have something to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, me and Doug are the same age.
Yeah.
Venom's got some years on us, so to kind of put it into context, this was the late 80s. So not only were we very young, like 7, 8, 9 years old, or right in there, there was no internet. So a lot of times when shows would just kind of show up, you didn't have a lot of advanced information. Now, maybe, Venom being older than us, maybe he had more resources just for the fact that he was older and he heard more through the grapevine. But I remember, I think I saw like 1 or 2 promos for this, and there was nothing in them suggesting that it would have zero to do with the movies. So I remember, like, I don't remember a ton about watching them when they originally aired, other than the fact that it took me like maybe 2 or 3, maybe even 4 episodes to realize, yeah, Jason's not showing up. Because I think even through the first episode as a kid, you're just assuming, like, I think I assumed at the time, oh, well, it's probably just some intricate story that they have to weave him in here, and this is kind of weird, but I'll figure it out in a few episodes. And once you kind of get the concept down, as that being a young kid, that you realize, okay, no, this is the show, and Jason's not walking into the shop to retrieve like a cursed machete or something. So
no, I mean, there was definitely rumors on I don't know if it was the playground or wherever when I was a teenager, that the final episode of it was about them trying to find Jason's mask. I think that's a pretty common rumor about this show. It might even still float around today to some extent for people not too familiar with it. But yeah, no, it's just important to get it right out of the way, right off the bat. This has nothing to do with Friday the 13th, the movie series, which, you know what, in some ways for me is a good thing. I know, Mike, you're aware, I'm not a huge fan of the Friday the 13th movie series. And in fact, I have a lot of love for some of the less loved portions of that series, including one starring one of the stars of this show, which is another connection with that franchise. I just want to mention the other thing that I knew, even as a young person, about this show was that it was Canadian. At least it was filmed in Canada. And I don't know how I knew that. It was just kind of a feeling. Maybe it was something that they promoted here in Canada to a slight extent, but also the fact that there were a lot of Canadian actors who would appear in smaller parts. I wouldn't have been aware at that time that Canadian directors were involved as well, including some very famous ones, as you'll luckily get to see. But yeah, so the Canadianness and the fact that it wasn't what I was expecting were the two things I most remembered from it. My own revisiting of it has been very minor. I was part of a retrospective for David Cronenberg a few years back, where we watched all of his films and all of his TV work, and he directed an episode of this. So I did watch it then and enjoyed that very much. So hey, I'm in a good mood. I'm feeling positive, right? Let's watch Friday the 13th, the series.
There you go.
Yeah, and I also scanned the wiki pages of the series overall earlier today, and I did read that the original title was The 13th Hour. The producer or the creator never intended to directly tie it to the Friday the 13th film series, but I don't know if it was kind of suggested to them, hey, what would make more people watch it is if they maybe thought that there was a connection. So let's go ahead and change the title and give maybe the false sense of hope. And yeah, it definitely created confusion for my age group at the time. But much like Doug, I mean, once I got over the fact that, okay, this isn't a Jason Voorhees related series, I actually kind of was fine with it. It's just, obviously it was hard to avoid that initial confusion, but I actually do like the concept of the show for what is. Mm-hmm. Now, how they executed that's what we'll kind of get into as we go through the series.
I mean, in some ways, it's a real success story, right? I mean, the fact is, what you were saying with Mike, it makes total sense. You had a series that was called something else. You have the producer of the Friday the 13th movies. He has the ability to call it that. It's much easier to sell with that title. Well, they did it. They sold it with that title. And it lasted, 3 full seasons, which is, for a syndicated show, isn't bad at all.
And now that the youngins are done talking, let me tell you a little bit about the 18-year-old who watched this. I'm going to completely disagree with Mike because I knew 100% that this series did not involve Jason before episode 1 aired. I distinctly remember the trailer commercial that was airing on the channel that aired it. And Curious Goods was even in the commercial. Like the commercial opened with the storefront of Curious Goods, and the couple of commercials that I saw, they had Jack, they had Ryan, they had Mickey, maybe a quick shot of Lewis, and that was it. And I think that was kind of the talk at the time amongst like horror fans of my age group. We were like, is anybody going to watch this thing that doesn't actually involve Jason? When my friends, the people in my circles, knew that Jason wasn't going to be in it, few of them decided to watch it. I absolutely wanted to watch it because I love the franchise. Yes, I love Jason, but I also just love anything with the Friday the 13th title on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be set at Crystal Lake or involve a hockey mask killer necessarily. I mean, there's a movie from like the 60s or 50s, I want to say, that was actually also called Friday the 13th. Not a horror film at all, but it did kind of talk about bad luck and aspects of superstition, right. Things like that. So I am just an overall fan. I remember watching the first episode and just loving it and just thinking, yes, I am on board for this. I am very okay with them kind of expanding the universe, the Friday the 13th universe. I mean, don't forget, I'm also one of the few people in my circle that was not upset with Halloween 3 and Michael Myers not being in that movie. I loved Halloween 3 when I walked out of the theater, and I was thinking, this is awesome. If they just give us like a different story every year set around Halloween, this could turn into my favorite series. Instead, they bring back, the Shatner masked killer to do a couple of subpar movies. Wait, a couple? More like 6, but whatever. The point is, I like when franchises take a chance. I like when they do different things. And I've already said Friday the 13th is my favorite horror film franchise. And part of why I love it is because every movie isn't the same. Yeah, you get all the Paramount movies that have a lot of similarities. I totally understand that. But as soon as New Line jumped in, you're getting stuff like Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy vs. Jason, Jason X, admittedly not the greatest movie in the franchise. But if you're a fan, you still see the entertainment value in it. So yeah, from my experience with the show was always positive. But let's see if that continues with our retrospective.
That was the nicest way to say, I love this shameless cash-in.
Hey, you know what? It didn't cost me any money, so I'm okay with it. All right, let's go ahead and get into our first episode. Season 1, episode 1, first aired on October 3rd, 1997. We are looking at director William Fruitt, writer Frank Mancuso, Bill Taub, and Larry B. Williams. Of course.
Wait, that's got to be 87, right? Did you actually say
97? Very sorry. Our synopsis for our first episode is as follows. 2 cousins, Ryan Dillon, how the hell does he pronounce his name? Ryan Dallion and Mickey Foster inherit an antique shop from their uncle. Together with his partner, they must track down cursed objects that their devil-worshipping uncle had created. The first object is a demonic killer doll. That concept's never been done. Mike, why don't you go ahead and tell me some general thoughts on this episode?
All right, so going into I can't remember if I already said during my little spiel, as far as the individual episodes, I don't remember a whole lot, so this is mostly going to be like fresh thoughts. Now, I assume as we go through the series, some memories will be triggered depending on the episode, but I didn't remember much about this episode as I was watching it, but I'm going to assume because this was the first episode, it kind of felt like there were 2 major things going on because we kind of got our actual intro setting up our characters in the shop and everything about it while simultaneously trying to do, the cursed item with the evil doll, which that really kind of takes over in like the last 15 minutes where we get lots of cursed doll action. I mean, the doll does do other things throughout the episode, but it really felt like the first episode was kind of split between, you know, fixing up the shop and then figuring out, everything's cursed. We gotta, you know, we get the introduction to the childhood friend of the original shopkeep owner or shop. Yeah. Am I saying that right? Shopkeeper. Okay. Yeah. And I guess, you know, right off the bat, I'll say I love, like I said, I do love the concept of cursed items. I feel like in a show like this, something you're probably going to run into is a lot of familiar territory when it comes to like the cursed items, probably from like shows or movies you've seen before. Cursed doll. You know, it's not exactly a new concept, but for what it was, I mean, the doll itself kind of cheesy. It did have the creepy look, but the doll was kind of vicious, and I did kind of get a kick out of the fact that the doll's powers like are kind of vast. Like at first, I think it like slashed the guy's neck. And then it just turned into like Carrie doll, where like. And I guess I'd be remiss not to bring up the fact that Sarah Polley, the actress, is introduced in this series. I can't say for sure if it's the first thing she's ever done, but she was awfully young. She's basically holding up the doll at times, and the doll's just, you know, either using the force or telekinesis to do, you know, move people around. And if I had to say general thoughts on the first episode, just I would say for a pilot episode, I still liked it. I don't think there was anything major conceptually, you know, out of bounds with this one. There was nothing too off the cuff, nothing not expected. But it's a pilot episode, which a lot of times are made for like setting things up and kind of letting you know what you're in for. And I do like kind of like after they lock the doll away and our two characters, which I will call at the risk of being laughed at, our original Mulder and Scully, right? I love at the end when they're like, gee, I wonder what's gonna come next, and then the final dialogue is the shopkeeper like, oh no, or whatever. Like obviously he's probably hearing about something. So I like that was a nice little cliffhanger setup for the series. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I kind of rambled, but yeah, that's general thoughts.
Doug, come on in here, buddy.
Yeah, so I feel like I should come on every episode of this podcast just to give some Canadian background to what's going on here to a certain extent. And I'm going to start with the director, William Fruet. Now, here in Canada, William Fruet is best known as the writer of the movie Going Down the Road from 1970. He's one of he wrote the screenplay for it. Going Down the Road was like a monumental movie for Canadian cinema at the time. It was a Canadian-made, Canadian-starring movie. It made a huge impact, basically launched the Canadian film industry of what it is. And he became like a central face in that industry, particularly making genre movies. Like he made Spasms in 1983, you may know that one, Killer Party from 86, and Blue Monkey in 87, which also featured Sarah Polley, by the way. That was a film that she made before this. She had some roles. She did a lot of TV stuff before this movie. Sarah Polley, I'm glad that you mentioned her. She's very young here, a few years before The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which probably was her most visible role of childhood until she was on Road to Avonlea, which if you were growing up in Canada in the 90s, you watched a lot of Road to Avonlea. So you're very familiar with Sarah Polley, child actress. Most of what I would say about this episode would echo what Mike said. The thing about it being the pilot is that it has to do a lot of work to set up everything. And so half this episode really does feel like that setup. And it's... I like this once they introduce the Jack Marshak character because it breaks up the bickering between the two cousins at its core, played by John LeMay and Louise Roby. And, you know, I don't mind the tension between these two cousin characters. I was reading in the book about this series that they intentionally made them cousins to avoid like a moonlighting type situation where you keep asking, will they, won't they? But my understanding is that they do a lot of sexual tension between them anyway. So making them cousins is going to be even weirder, I think, the more that you watch this show. But I think John LeMay is actually really good. He adds a lightness to it that it really needs. Unfortunately, on this episode, Louise Roby is not given much to do outside of being very unpleasant. And she's supposed to be like the serious, aloof character compared to this goofy guy. They even have that moment, which is in so many shows, where she's like, we're going to sell off all of these antiques. And he's like, over my dead body. And they cut to the sale already in progress. Classic sitcom stuff. Once it settles down, once the ground is laid and it gets to the killer doll, I was into it quite a bit. I mean, it is very much of the level of syndicated entertainment of that time, in that there's actually a surprising amount of violence. There is a slit throat that is pretty well done here, and I wasn't expecting it. My memory of this show is that it is fairly bloodless for the most part, but they did obviously take advantage of the fact that they had a little bit more freedom to do more with the content on this show. So that was nice to see, though it mostly, it's a lot of the beats that you would expect. That she gets rid of her stepmother that she doesn't like, meaning Sarah Polley uses the doll to get rid of her stepmother. The doll seems to have kind of undefined levels of power. And then it all kind of culminates in this playground set piece, which is kind of fun. I really liked it. And, Sarah Polley's very good as a child actress. So overall, I would say this is a big old thumbs up, but also with the caveat that this is supposed to be one of the better episodes of the series, so you got to watch out there. One other little tidbit, just simply because I read it earlier, which is that this was like the third or fourth episode that they filmed specifically because they wanted to make sure that the two leads they'd worked out their chemistry. They'd worked out in terms of the process of making the episodes. They were a lot more comfortable with it. So even though this is the first, and was always designed to be the first episode, obviously, because it was all set up, they'd already filmed several episodes before this to ease in.
As far as I go, I had a good time with this episode. Like I said, I remember liking these characters throughout the series run. So yeah, the fact that they're a little kind of, confrontational in the episode, it does wear thin, but at least it doesn't last long. As Doug said, once Jack gets there, all the bickering kind of ends, once they realize what they did with their little fire sale. I agree with Doug that Mickey really doesn't get much to do in this episode. She legitimately is just eye candy. It's terrible because, her character does get a little bit more fleshed out as the series goes, as with all the characters in the show. But yeah, in this one, she's legitimately eye candy. It also really bothered me that she completely changes personality from the opening scene that she's in to when she gets to the actual shop. Like, she actually says, darling. Are you kidding me? She actually said that to her fiance, darling, don't worry. Oh,
she has the big 80s hair going too.
80s hair I love. Especially redheads don't usually have that nice thick hair that's curly without being, too ultra kinky. No, I really like that hair. For whatever it's worth. I was a 17-year-old when this show first aired. Yeah, I liked Mickey. Sue me. Obviously, I'm pretty sure my opinion of her is going to change as this series goes along, but fingers crossed that I don't end up hating this woman by the time we're done. Enjoy the character development, the introduction to the store. I love seeing R.G. Armstrong in anything.
Yes.
So even if it's only like 5 minutes, I'll take it. And like Doug said, once it gets to the actual quote unquote Annabelle part of the episode, it definitely ramps up the horror element of it all. Because the first half of the show, it's really more about explanation. You get a little bit of exposition at the beginning, not exposition, but, a little bit of setup of, Uncle Lewis at the beginning. You don't really know what's going on. There's no real context to the whole thing. It's kind of got to be explained later on by Jack and then the manifest once they find that. I feel like the episode flowed well. I thought it was a good episode to start the series. And for whatever it's worth, it got me to keep watching. As I said, I watched every single episode when this aired back in the 80s. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me, but hey, I watched a lot worse stuff than this, I'll tell you that.
I'm actually going to stomp on you here for a second, Mike.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, simply because for those who haven't seen this show, or I think maybe we might want to elaborate a little bit more about the general concept, which is about the cursed items and them having to track it down. I think we get it across, but I have to say, even with I had a good amount of knowledge about the series, the opening sequence where you see the uncle, yell into the ether about, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'd forgotten that he had made some sort of pact with Satan. A lot of that flew over my head when I was a kid.
Yeah, I remembered enough to know that it was a shop full of like cursed antiques or items, but I had forgotten like why they were cursed in the first place. And as I was watching it, it was like, little details kind of trickled back, like, oh yeah, because he did this. But if I would have tried to like talk about this without like seeing it again, I would have totally forgotten that aspect of it too. One other thing I was just going to bring up regarding Sarah Pauli's character, the kid, it's at one point I was almost like cracking up at the fact that I was like, man, this kid is like awfully okay with like seeing adults injured and killed, like she just for wanting to get the doll taken away. And I'm trying to remember, because I know certain items, like certain episodes in the series, they definitely imply like the item, once like the user starts using it, it almost kind of like they take over the it kind of possessed them. And I was trying to remember, did that happen in this episode, or was it just happenstance that she seemed pretty okay
was she
with
just an evil
hurt?
Kid who hooked up with an evil doll? I like at the end it's like, look, we've gotten the doll back. Spoiler alert, by the way. They get the doll back. We lock it away. Hey, is that kid going to be okay? He's like, sure, after a decade of therapy.
Perfect. Honestly, I think that little girl's a sociopath. I mean, that little girl willingly basically murdered two people. Granted, the doll did the hard part. The doll did the heavy lifting, but the actual lifting of the doll itself was done by the little girl. So I'm thinking the exact same thing at the end of this episode. I'm like, is this girl, was she possessed and didn't know what she was doing? Because if at the end of the episode she actually has a knowledge and remembers everything she did, that little girl is going to grow up to be an absolute sociopath, because she's going to remember that she got away with murder twice.
She's gonna do more damage as an adult than she could have done with the fucking doll as a kid.
Guaranteed. So
I would like lots of drugs and go to a rave in a movie, and then she's gonna survive a zombie apocalypse, I guess. Oh. It's setting her up.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about the story a little bit. Let's get into this story. Obviously, we've already kind of explained that, this is a shop called Curious Goods, if we haven't mentioned that yet, of course, which almost was the name of the podcast, but I thought that was a little too derivative, so I decided on something a little bit different. Mike and I decided on something.
Instead, you decided to tease people in the same way that the people who made this show teased them by putting Crystal Lake in there.
Well, isn't that 100% poignant? I love it.
It certainly is. It's on point.
I totally adore it. Hell, our avatar is Jason's mask, so whatever. I have no problem with that. But yeah, like I said, we're introduced to Uncle Lewis, who, for whatever reason, is running this shop where he doesn't want to sell anything in it. Like I said, the opening scene doesn't really have a lot of context, because as I'm watching it and he's yelling at that couple for wanting to buy that doll, I'm like, well, why don't you lock the fucking door, idiot? And then I realize, well, it's a deal with the devil. Even if he locked the door, the devil would probably unlock it and get more people in there. So I totally, the supernatural element of it does explain away a lot of the plot holes. But ultimately, Uncle Lewis at some point made a deal with the devil. As Jack, his childhood friend, explains, he has a fear of dying and makes a deal with the devil for immortality. And what is his part of the deal? He must sell cursed objects in the devil's name, of course. All of the objects in the store are cursed in one way or another. And obviously, as the series goes along, we're going to see all the different items and the different curses that they all possess. I don't remember all of them, obviously, but I do remember a couple. I remember an episode with a makeup kit that I'm actually really looking forward to, because I remember that being my favorite episodes.
That happens to be the one I remember. It was like a vanity mirror, like one of those snap open ones.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it like whoever looks in the mirror with her looking at it at the same time, like falls in love with her or something like that. I think that's how it worked vaguely.
No, the one I'm thinking of, this was a guy. The guy bought the makeup, and he was using the makeup to make himself younger. But the curse was that every time he took off the makeup, he looked older. So, he would look younger by using the makeup, but like I said, every time he removes it, he would like gain 5 years on his face or whatever. I ultimately could be thinking of an entirely different series. We'll have to find out.
I'll tell you what, Venom, we better stop talking about future episodes, because Doug's going to really be enticed to keep coming back.
Yes, I'm sure it's Doug's desire to work with us on 72 episodes of this series.
Tell me more about these cursed mirrors.
He's like, how many episodes involve cursed mirrors and makeup?
It's important to note, I think, that because this is a syndicated series in the 1980s, and I mean this is the case for syndicated series in the 90s as well, there's very little continuity on this show. So there isn't a lot of ongoing storylines that like you would see in the later part of the 90s, even with, there's a little bit of growth in the characters is my understanding. And the other thing that's kind of notable, and that I'm glad that I was part of this episode, is that this doll does show up in several more episodes going forward. So they at least remember that this was an important part of the continuity.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I remember one of the music box episodes. That music box is noticeable in the vault whenever they go in there. Because later in the series, it actually becomes kind of a staple at the end of the show to lock up whatever it is that they repossessed or whatever. So, yeah, whenever you go into that vault, be very careful and look around in the background. You're going to see all sorts of familiar items.
Well, I think that is an important distinction between a show like this and something like Freddy's Nightmares, which is a true anthology where each episode's a different story, although there is a couple times they do continuations. But with this series, it's like, yes, each episode centers around a new item, but we have recurring characters. So I have zero memory of like any little side arcs between the characters that might continue throughout the series. Now, I do know at one point they introduce like a second guy, and then there's a few episodes where there's like where all three of them are in them, and then this guy leaves for the third season, I believe. But other than that, I don't remember much about like the character stories, if there even is any. So that'll be something to keep an eye on too going forward.
Absolutely, yeah. Continuity is big for a lot of us. Some of us kind of forgive the lack of continuity, but it is nice, as Doug mentioned, to see items in the vault from previous episodes and maybe even from future episodes. Who knows? As I said, after the opening, the cold open, if you will, where, Uncle Lewis is kind of taken by some entity by just the worst CGI fire you've ever seen. I don't even think it's CGI. It's probably like a camera trick of some kind, like a what do you call it? I totally forget what it was called. But anyway, yeah, some pretty bad effects throughout the episode. But ultimately, it's from 87. It's for whatever it's worth. It's got its charm. I'm still a fan, at least after episode 1. I'm still very much a fan. So again, after we get our cold open, we are introduced first to Mickey, who kind of comes off as like a Connecticut snob, like, one of those blue blood wives that, just insipid person that you'd never, ever want to be around. And then when she gets to the shop, I feel like she takes a complete personality change. Like she's timid because she's, a little freaked out by the old store and all the weird items in it, blah, blah, blah. But it's really odd that she is just a completely different person when she's around her fiance, who, by the way, is pretty much a piece of shit. But yeah. I think that was their intention. He's that late 80s douchebag lawyer, the Wall Street wannabe type guy that, oh, God, he even makes a comment about, oh, well, maybe we could sue your cousin for more control of the store. Yikes. That's a red flag. And apparently she saw the red flag because I don't think we ever see her fiance ever again in the series. So, A+ there. But yeah, when she gets to the store, she meets Mickey. They have a weird interaction because, she meets Ryan. She is Mickey. And Ryan basically was told that his cousin Michael would be running the store with him. So he was fully expecting a man. They have that uncomfortable situation, that uncomfortable meeting, if you will. We do get the shot of him kind of checking out his cousin from top to bottom, which is just cringy as shit. But in his credit, he probably didn't know it was her cousin yet. So I'll forgive him there. But yeah, they have their awkward introduction. And they start going back and forth on what to do with the store. At one point in the episode, they find the manifest accidentally by kind of twisting one of the banisters on the next to the stairs. And obviously, it doesn't really mean a lot to them. It just looks like a normal manifest, items that were sold, the people that they were sold to, things like that. But then right at the end of their fire sale, where they decide to just sell off everything in the store, should we say Mickey decided to sell off everything in the store, because ultimately Ryan wanted to run the store. So they decide to sell off everything in the store. They end up selling most of what's in the store. Ryan makes the comment that we should be able to sell off the rest of this stuff tomorrow and then be done with the shop. And then our little friend Jack shows up like a Sith Lord hiding in the attic. He comes down with his brown robe on, his Obi-Wan Kenobi robe. And what is he armed with? Like a magic wand or something? I forget.
Something like that.
It literally looked like he thought he was a wizard and he was holding them at bay with his magic wand, but whatever. Obviously, the introductions happen. He's wondering why they're talking about their uncle in the past tense. They let him know that he has passed away, and then we get the explanation that we kind of have already given, that, Uncle Lewis made a deal with the devil. His half of the deal was to sell these cursed items, and he would basically live forever. He would have eternal life. We get a little bit of an explanation of the cold open where Jack says, well, the reason he might not be here is because he probably went back on the deal and probably decided he didn't want to do this anymore, which, if you remember the cold open, it kind of makes sense. We see R.G. Armstrong, Uncle Lewis, very frustrated. A couple of customers come in interested in the quote unquote Annabelle doll. He decides that he's not going to sell it to him. He actually screams at the top of his lungs that nothing in the store is for sale, and basically just decides, I think he even says out loud, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. And That's when we see, something kind of take Uncle Lewis from us. Not the greatest looking scene, but again, it's charming, so I'll give it its credit. And then at that point, we basically get the parents from the cold open who came interested with the doll. The dad actually comes back to the store 6 months. This is 6 months later. So I can't believe a dad had that good of a memory to remember this random doll that his daughter wanted. But there you go. So he goes in, he pays for the doll. Mickey is reluctant to sell it because earlier in the episode, she thinks that she saw the doll move and stare at her, which, of course, the doll absolutely did. Pretty much the rest of the episode is Mickey and Ryan trying to track down the doll. They track down the house of the owner. When they get there, stepmom has already somehow ended up in the hospital. The scene there is basically mom. Oh man, and mom, holy shit. I hate to use this word, but goddamn, what a cunt. I absolutely hated her. The whole time I'm screaming at the father, defend your daughter for God's sakes. I mean, who the hell? Jesus, she must have this guy's balls in her purse, because he literally never admonishes her for yelling at his daughter for something that's completely unwarranted. But, that's the episode. We got to set up the evil stepmother, if you will. And she is exactly that. There's a scene where she tries to take the doll away from Mary, Sarah Polly. And, the doll basically, through telekinesis of some kind, as Mike said, or maybe the Force, basically takes a roller skate, wheels it over to the top of the stairs. Now, this is the thing I don't understand about this scene. Mom is basically, or stepmom, is yelling at Mary to give her the doll. And as soon as Mary lifts up the doll to give it to her, mom is suddenly scared. And the doll hasn't started moving or anything. She's just like, uh-oh, what do I do? It's like, well, what do you mean, what do you do? You asked her for the damn doll. Take it. Of course, she backs up, steps on the roller skate, falls down the stairs. I was cheering because I thought that was the end of stepmom, but alas, no, she survives her fall. Mickey and Ryan end up getting to the house just as the ambulance is taking the family away. They have a little interaction with Mary, and they actually both see the doll kind of hiss at them or something. It was kind of weird. Basically, move her eyes and mouth and, make a weird gesture towards them. They both kind of are taken aback. Mary is then rushed into the ambulance. Not that Mary's hurt, but of course it's stepmom that was hurt. They're all going to the hospital, and then we get our inevitable hospital scene with the doll doing I don't know what to stepmom. Like, I don't know if she was choking her, stuffing something in her mouth. The camera is perfectly set up so that the back of the doll is facing the camera, and you have no idea what she's doing. And then suddenly, mom's heart stops beating. We get the great shot of the EKG. It goes flatline, and then we see mom kind of go limp, and the doll just kind of had her hands on mom's neck. Now, this is a porcelain doll. It's not like she has kung fu grip, like she could actually grab anything. So again, suspension of disbelief. I'll allow it. The doll's obviously evil, so who knows? Maybe the doll doesn't even have to touch her to kill her. Maybe she just kind of made Mary do all this so that Mary would be, an accomplice, aiding and abetting, if you will, so that I guess the doll's conscience is clear that she's not the only murderer. I don't know. I'm speculating, but whatever. We finally get a ridiculous scene where Mary has her stuffed animals kind of attacking her nanny, who's watching her while dad is taking care of the funeral arrangements for his stepmother, or for his wife, his ex-wife, Mary's stepmother. And basically, there's a conversation about cookies. Mary gets mad. She holds up Annabelle. What was the actual name of the doll? I've been calling her Annabelle.
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure.
She actually did call her something. Like, she even introduced her at one point, and I don't remember. I want to say something like Lena or Mina or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. She ends up lifting the doll up, pointing it towards the nanny. Suddenly, stuffed animals start coming to life, and it doesn't sound nearly as cool as I'm describing it, I assure you. And then suddenly a jump rope kind of finagles its way off the shelf and around the nanny's throat, basically, choking her to death. But luckily, our heroes, Mickey and Ryan, arrive just in time to, stop the doll from choking the nanny out. And Mickey sees that the kid is out in the backyard on a swing set playing with the doll. She goes out. They have their inevitable interaction. The girl, Mary obviously is very aware that they're here to take her doll. I mean, Mary knows this doll is evil. Whether she's possessed or not, she knows that there's something about this doll, and she knows that these two people are here to take it away from her. We have a ridiculous scene on a what is that? Is that a merry-go-round, tilt-a-whirl? What the fuck do we call that thing?
I can't remember what those are called, but I think we all know what those are.
Yeah, it spins around and you hang on and get sick.
Yeah, or don't hang on and get a concussion like I did. Whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what we end up with is this ridiculous scene of two adults who apparently have trouble getting a doll away from a child. Now, yes, I understand that the merry-go-round thing is spinning and, inertia is forcing them to the outer edge of it. But there are literal scenes where Mickey is about 6 inches away from the girl, and she makes the lamest attempt to grab the doll. Like, she's purposely trying to look like she's trying to grab it, but coming up short every single time. So, again, a little bit of suspension of disbelief there.
You mean when Mickey was chasing her on the playground and the doll unleashed a mean swing at her that barely looked like it even touched her?
Oh, man.
And speaking of that scene, because now that we're on it, was the writing suggesting that the doll went into like super evil mode that caused like overcast skies and thunder, or was that just bad weather? I was like, what in the world is going on here?
I don't know. Doug knows William Fruitt better than I do. I thought it was coincidence, but
I think we're supposed to think that doll has a lot more power than we had seen up to that point. Maybe the more kills, it gives it more power. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. Otherwise, why would it have to just smother the mother or whatever the fuck it does by just laying on it?
I feel like in that case, the doll needs like its own special confinement, like lockup, even beyond the other cursed items.
You would think so, right? With that level of power.
Exactly. I mean, there's a reason Annabelle's kept in a case, because apparently, ultimately it's a different story. This is a legitimately possessed doll, whereas Annabelle is a conduit for a demon. Whole other story, I understand, but we do see the obvious similarities. And
the doll is named Veda, by the way.
Veda, thank you. Thank you very much. I knew it was something that ended in an A. So like I said, after Mickey and Ryan get the doll away from her, they're able to take it back to the shop. Instantly, Mary goes from evil little sociopath to crying child after she's separated from the doll and thrown off the merry-go-round thing. She's instantly back to, just a crying kid. Mickey grabs this child and kisses her, and I'm thinking, hey, stranger danger. You're not supposed to be touching random children, okay? So anyway, we end up back at the store. We see them put the doll back in the vault. I think there is a little teaser at the end, if you will, or a stinger, I think they call it. And basically, that's our series pilot. We are now set up for the Friday the 13th series moving forward. We know the major players. We know what they're doing. And obviously, at this point, we're just hoping that the cursed items get better and better with every episode. Obviously, you're going to get varying degrees of results with every episode, which is the whole point of this podcast, is us going through that.
Real quick, I did find, or I navigated to, so there's a wiki page for like the overall series, but then it breaks it down by the 3 seasons, and then even further. Now I'm on the episode to episode guide, and it actually gives you a little for each episode. It'll give you the stats like season 1, episode 1, the name, director, and all that stuff. But then it'll give you a synopsis, and it says a synopsis: cursed antique obviously a doll that kills people for its owner is what's listed. But then what's cool, it says villain and fate. And I just cracked up because it says Mary survives, but speculated to suffer severe psychological trauma.
I love it.
Which is accurate because that goes with the dialogue that was suggested in the episode.
Yeah, that one throwaway line from Ryan, absolutely, which was still rather funny, I will say.
I wonder if I was just going to say, I wonder if, because the way, and it could just be coincidence how it says a doll that kills people for its owner. So maybe it's like something that the whoever's in possession of the doll almost initiates through possession or something, because you do notice when, like, once the doll gets ripped away from the kid, it's not like the doll is still like talking, trying to fight or anything. It just goes limp like any old doll. So there must be something suggested that there's a possession factor. Maybe it takes advantage of the person in possession of it.
I wish they would have implied that a little bit more. I understand that Mary went back to being a normal kid as soon as they separated her, but yeah, the whole time I'm thinking this girl's going to have a very, very interesting adolescence and teenage years.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet is the soundtrack, especially the opening theme to Friday the 13th, the series, which is, I think, one of the things that people most remember about this series is that opening theme, which is very, very creepy, composed by Fred Molan, who also was the composer of the soundtracks of Friday the 13th, Part 8 and 7. So he certainly was connected to the quote-unquote series. But most notably, because, again, he's also a Canadian composer, he did the music for David Cronenberg's Fast Company, the race car film.
Yeah, and since you did bring up the intro, I think that's kind of like a reoccurring theme with this era of like these horror anthology shows is the series. The episodes might be a mixed bag, but damn, they could sure as hell put together an intro for like all of them. Like like the Tales from the Dark Side intro is like one of my all-time favorite horror intros of anything ever.
Still gives me chills. Absolutely. When he says that last line and that last keyboard note is held down, I still get chills. I don't care.
Yeah, I remember the first couple times I saw Tales from the Dark Side, that intro affected me so much that when we'd be taking like road trips or something, and I'd be looking, out the window to the side, if we're in any type of like country or forest setting, I would immediately think of like, oh, there's a dark side in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And same with me. I love this theme song. It's probably one of my favorite parts of this whole thing. The one thing that stuck with me over the years is the great theme song. I legitimately enjoy it. It's great to see, a composer with actual pedigree from the franchise come in and do this theme song, which does, iconic might be a stretch, for a series that isn't exactly popular, but for us genre heads who, consume this kind of content, this is literally, this and Tales from the Dark Side, definitely. Even Monsters had a great intro. Even though the music wasn't a big part of Monsters' intro, that was an awesome intro with the family and all. So, I can't disagree that this theme song is pretty awesome. Well, guys, it's getting close to closing time here at the shop. You guys have anything else you want to say?
I mean, I think you guys are in for a ride. I mean, look, I've already hinted at it a couple of times. I am a big fan of Jason Goes to Hell. So when I think of John LeMay, the actor who plays Ryan in this show, I think of him more from that movie than I think of him from this show. I do think that he's a very welcome presence here. I think I've already said that, but I hope that Louise Roby eases into that role a little bit. Like you said, she already has changed a bit, even by the end of this episode. I hope they actually make for a team that is. It's going to be so hard to set up all of these things where they're just showing up at people's houses and have to explain without explaining why the hell they're there. And I just don't know how over 24, 48 plus 70 episodes that the setups are they going to be the same, if they're going to mix it up a lot. But I mean, I'm excited to see where it goes from here, and I'm glad you're doing this because it is even if the plots are not always the most engaging, and I don't know that for a fact, but my understanding is that would be, I mean, all anthology shows are like that to a certain extent. The fact that there's interesting actors who pop up, and even for me, interesting locations that pop up, and people involved with it it just has a really interesting connection to genre cinema at the time, and just sort of the atmosphere of anthologies that were going on at that time period. So Good luck with it. Hopefully, I can come back a little bit later in the in this show. Like forward into the podcast episodes and see where we are at that point.
Absolutely, well said. Very well said, Mike. Any closing comments?
Kind of piggyback off what Doug said. I mean, I love the setup of the cursed items in the shop that they're trying to retrieve. Because my memory overall is so evaporated by now on it, I do kind of wonder how it'd be interesting to see if there's ever a point where the public in the show or something start learning about the shop, and do people start coming to them with odd occurrences? Because I'm assuming the way it makes it seem is they don't really have a ton of records of the sales of where everything went. So it's are they going to have to just kind of monitor the news and say, hey, people are strangely dying. We don't know how. Let's just go investigate and see if it's because of a cursed item. It'll be interesting to see how they handle the actual retrieval and them figuring out that these deaths are caused by a cursed item to begin with. So that's something to keep an eye on going forward.
Very much so. Very much so.
I got to pick up one other thing. Sorry, I know that you're about to finish. This is just important because I just remembered it. I was just reading through. There's a book. Again, there's a lengthy book devoted to this series called Curious Goods. And I was just leafing through it a little bit. And they mentioned something that I had forgotten, which is that this show was not called Friday the 13th, the series in Canada. It was called Friday's Curse instead. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still knew of it as Friday the 13th, the series, because I probably saw it in syndication on a U.S. channel. But yeah, so I guess the Canadians, there wasn't as clear of an attempt to fool them when it was first airing.
What's funny is that now that you mentioned that, I do have a vague memory of visiting Niagara Falls, New York, sometime in the early 90s, mm-hmm. and seeing a videotape in a convenience store, in the bargain bin, that said Friday's Curse. And I'm like, ooh, what's this? This looks interesting. And then when I turned it over, I realized it was Friday the 13th, the series, and I didn't buy it. So
it's a show that's constantly trying to fool you.
Hey.
Imagine having that in your collection right now.
Oh, yeah, right now. Jesus. Oh, my God. I'm thinking about all the Godzilla VHSs that I let die in my childhood. Oh, my God, the money I could have right now. All right, folks. Well, the store will be closing in 10 minutes. Please bring your final purchases to the front for Mike to ring you out. And while we do that, let's ask our friend Doug Tilley where else people can hear his stuff.
Well, you can find my show, Cinema Smorgasbord, every Monday at cinemasmorgasbord.com, where the latest episode is always available on cinepunks.com. It's a umbrella podcast, which has a lot of podcasts underneath that umbrella. A podcast devoted to diverse topics such as the chronological career of Carol Kane, George Kennedy, Paul Bartel, Dick Miller, of course, Eric Roberts, as well as podcasts devoted to Alejandro Jodorowsky and others. You can check that out, including Jackie Chan. You can find that at cinemasmorgasbord.com or on Twitter at cinemasmorg. That's SMORG, or you can find me on Twitter at Doug_Tilley. That's TILLEY.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Doug. Mike, while you're ringing up those final purchases, where else can people hear you?
All right. Well, No More Room in Hell is the main show that I do with Venom here, as well as Derek. We should be recording the new one in a week or two, I think. And Fresh Cuts is the weekly show where we're covering the latest in horror. The latest episode out is Glorious, which is now on Shudder. And we do have an episode recorded on the Orphan First Kill prequel that will be up within probably by early next week. And what else? I just started the new sidecast, Watch This Movie, Mike, where I bring on a guest that picks a movie, kind of do a short little interview, and then we get into the movie. And wouldn't you know it, our guest here, Doug Tilley, was the first guest on that too. I see a theme with Doug always being a willing participant.
I decided to kill it in the crib by picking The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp to talk about a movie that, I mean, I love it, and I know it's a very beloved movie, but not necessarily the kind of movie that appeals to a lot of genre fans.
Yeah, well, I do have 3 episodes of that out now. The latest is with Brian Sammons as a guest, and I'm working on episode 4, or getting that scheduled, so look for more of that. And the only other active show I have is Burning for Springwood. It's not on a hiatus. It's just a matter of getting us together again. That's Gary Hill's brainchild. Was much similar to this show. We are covering Freddy's Nightmares episode by episode, and the next episode we record will be the last 2 episodes of season 1. So if you can believe it, we made it through a whole season of that. Very mixed bag on that show, but it's always fun to record. And I think that's it for me, Venom.
Awesome. Well, while I lock up the shop, let me go ahead and tell you about a couple of my things. The other member of the No More Room in Hell family is called Creature Comforts. That is, of course, our creature feature show that I do with Mr. Donanelli and Derek B., who is also on the main show. And our latest episode is episode 11, where we look at Phil Tippett's Mad God. Our next episode, we're going to be doing a Fantasia Fest special, where we got to see 3 kaiju / monster, creature features from Japan that played at Fantasia Fest. We'll be giving spoiler-free reviews for those, as most of those movies don't even have American release dates yet, so most of them are still on the embargo. So we'll tell you everything that we can about each one. And let's see, various guest spots. Just yesterday, I did a guest spot on Lobo's Loot, which is a YouTube show. On this particular episode, though, we did Lobo Looks, which is his commentary, kind of his, watch together type thing. We basically watched Solo. Yes, the Star Wars film Solo that got panned when it first came out, and I was one of those people. If you want to hear somebody change their opinion on a movie, please go ahead and check this out. It is available on YouTube. I'm sorry. I am now on the hill for Solo. It was way more fun than I remembered it in theaters, but obviously that's a conversation for another show. So check that out on YouTube. You can find that on Lobo's Loot. I've done guest spots on the podcast Under the Stairs, The Dark Parade, Cut to the Chase, various others. So, look up Mr. Venom. I'm sure you'll find me. I've been on 1,000 podcasts in the last 2 months, so I'm not too hard to find. And last but not least, folks, thank you very much for visiting. This is obviously a new venture for us, and the more folks that we get in here patronizing the shop, the better we're going to do. So the store is officially closed. Thank you all so much for visiting, and we'll see you next time. Go ahead and say goodbye to the folks.
Goodbye.
See ya.
See you next time, folks.